Okay, so I heard that you're building on top of Bitcoin. And I've been quite public about what I think about the security of the Bitcoin network, specifically that in maybe 8 years or 10 years or so, Bitcoin will get 51% attacked. I think that the issuance going down exponentially is not long-term sustainable. I think the fees are not very healthy. And I was wondering if you agree with me that Bitcoin is long-term unsustainable.
Yeah, is this mic working or not? Testing, testing. Is it working? Yeah. All right. Yeah, so someone said predicting the future is very difficult. So my experience with Bitcoin is very hard to predict the future of Bitcoin because the demise of Bitcoin has been predicted several times before. So for example, right, if you think about order notes from 2 years ago, who would predicted that there will be NFTs issued on Bitcoin? That's unpredictable. Order notes is, for example, one source of giving transaction fees to Bitcoin. So it's rather unpredictable that what will happen to, so if you look at the security budget, right? The security budget is a function of 3 things, I think. One is how many Bitcoin is minted per block, and that's been halved. 2 is how much a Bitcoin is worth, because after all, you have, for a miner to mine, they're paying real-world cost. They're buying chips, they're paying for electricity. So the real-world cost is translated from Bitcoin to dollar. So that's the second thing. Third thing is the transaction fees. So if you look at the history, although we have halving every 4 years, the hashing rate is still going up rather significantly, actually very dramatically if you look at transaction fees. So my experience is that given there are these 3 factors, it's very hard to predict purely based on the first one, which is halving, whether the security budget of Bitcoin is going to be unsustainable.
Yeah, so I don't think the price of Bitcoin is relevant. And the reason is that there is an invariant, which is the ratio of the total supply divided by the cost to attack Bitcoin. So the market cap of Bitcoin is about $1 trillion, costs about $10 billion to attack it. So there's a ratio of 100 to 1. But maybe more relevantly, there is a derivatives market with perps and with futures. And so you can short Bitcoin in size. And it turns out that there's about $30 billion of open interest right now. So there's roughly a 3-to-1 ratio between the amount of Bitcoin that you can short and the cost of 51% attacking Bitcoin. And that doesn't depend on the price of Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin were to 10x, then open interest would most probably be $300 billion, and the cost to attack would be also 10x, roughly $100 billion. And what will happen is that with every successful halving, these ratios become worse and worse and worse. So what is now a 100 to 1 ratio between total value secured and total value securing the Bitcoin network is 100, it will go to 1,000. And the ratio between open interest and the cost to attack will also go up from 3 to 30. And so now you can imagine in the future if it costs, let's say, 0.1% of the Bitcoin supply to attack Bitcoin, but you stand to make 10 times more by shorting it, then it becomes a no-brainer to perform the attack.
Yeah, but there's still the transaction fees, though. So
OK, let's talk about transaction fees. So it's about 10 sats per VByte right now. And that is less than 5% of the issuance. So we're talking about 20x potential reduction in total security budget relative to the total market cap. So if the fees stay at roughly what they are, then the ratios will become worse by 20x because 5% is roughly 1/20th.
So yeah, so I think the whole point is that you don't want, so right, if you think about blockchain where you don't want to inflate the blockchain forever, then you would like to shift. You would like to shift the cost of securing that blockchain to the economic activity on the blockchain, right? So I think that's the reason why the transaction fees will become more important as you increase the transaction fees.
I mean, transaction fees will become absolutely critical for Bitcoin. And if people are not willing to pay $1,000 per transaction, then Bitcoin is in deep trouble. And I personally don't think that people will be willing to pay $1,000 per transaction. And in some sense, like the amount that people are willing is independent of what needs to be paid, right? Like it's a supply and demand market with the transaction fees. You can't artificially increase the transaction fees. I mean, there have been some ideas. Okay, let's reduce the block size. Of Bitcoin, let's go from 4 megabytes to 2 megabytes, let's say, per 10 minutes. And that might increase the fees, but this kind of price gouging doesn't necessarily work very well because now you have fewer transactions, and that contributes to fewer fees in total. So,
but you know, so I could give one data point, right?
Yeah.
Which is when we launched our testnet, I don't know you were here in the last talk, but when we launched our testnet, there were 100,000 staking transactions sent within a very short time, like 2 days. So this kind of activity, I'm not saying that Bitcoin staking is the only activity, but with more projects built on this kind of activity would potentially significantly increase the transaction fees. In fact, we're going to launch our mainnet, and actually we can't rather predict how much transaction fees there will be paid during our launch.
Okay, so let's talk about the transaction fees that you might create. My understanding of Babylon is that you have this Bitcoin restaking platform where you can create alternative chains, like side chains, that are external to the Bitcoin main chain. And so in some sense, you'd be creating block space which is cheaper, faster, more secure than Bitcoin L1. So wouldn't you be leeching activity away from Bitcoin and putting it in this other part of the ecosystem? And the fees that are created there don't impact the fees of Bitcoin.
So, okay. So Bitcoin staking is a security measure, right? It enables the building of these side chains or L2s, right?
So the side chains will be secure.
The side chain and L2 will have economic interaction with the main chain. Yes? Because after all, the reason why most people are building on Bitcoin is because of the value of the asset of Bitcoin. So therefore, so what we enable is to provide security so that more economic activities can be generated in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And this economic activities, hopefully, will lead to a significant increase in the transaction fees, which the miners will benefit from.
Right, but it turns out that the optimal way to do value transfers between two L2s is to do it directly through the L2. You don't want to go from L2 to L1 as a withdrawal and then a deposit from L1 to L2. So we have these designs, for example, with Polygon Ag Layer. zk-Sync is also looking into that. This notion of shared deposits, where when you do a transfer from L2 to L2, you don't go through the L1. And therefore, you wouldn't be creating transaction fees for the Bitcoin miners.
Yeah, but OK. So, but these economic activities are still built on the security of Bitcoin. So eventually, Bitcoin miners should benefit from all these economic activities, right? If everyone is bypassing that, then it doesn't seem like a sustainable system.
Oh, you said it yourself.
Right?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a sustainable system. I agree with you.
Yeah, so there should be ways of paying for that, right?
Well, it's wishful thinking to just say, because we need the Bitcoin chain to be secured, we're going to find a way to pay for it. Like, that doesn't sound sustainable. That sounds like wishful thinking. Like, we need to have credibly secure mechanisms to secure the Bitcoin blockchain. The issuance is going to zero. Fees are going to side chains. and economic activity will happen on those sidechains, why would the L1 survive?
If the L1 does not survive, then the sidechains don't survive.
Ah, okay. So that brings me to my next question. So we have one of your advisors, Sani Agarwal, who told me that he has the following master plan for Babylon.
He has a master plan.
He has a
didn't tell me
master
that.
plan.
Maybe, okay. All right. It's funny, his advisor doesn't tell me the master plan.
Okay, well, maybe you need to talk to him more, because it's a very interesting master plan. So he agrees with me that the Bitcoin proof of work is doomed to fail. Like within the next few years, if not decades, Bitcoin security will not work out. And so Bitcoin, the chain, will die, the proof of work chain. But that doesn't mean that the assets have to die. And also, it doesn't mean that we can't reboot Bitcoin as a proof of stake chain. And so his master plan is, let's get Bitcoiners comfortable with the notion of proof of stake through Babylon. And then when the Bitcoin proof of work chain inevitably dies, let's reboot it as a proof of stake chain at layer 1. That sounds sustainable.
That's his plan.
That's his master plan.
Okay. Good. Now, okay, so Babylon is a project that builds on Bitcoin.
Right.
We do not want to take ownership of sort of pushing forward the Bitcoin, right? So I'm not contemplating some master plans like this. However, since you mention it, so here's an idea, just brainstorming here, is, hey, you don't actually need to go and stop the proof of work chain and start another brand new chain, actually. There are other ways of doing it. So for example, the Bitcoin staking, as mentioned, is a concept that gets the Bitcoin community more familiar or more comfortable with the concept of staking. Now, Bitcoin staking is currently, as we propose it, is to use for securing other blockchains, right? Other blockchains. But you could imagine maybe if Bitcoin community is so comfortable with it, then we can use that to provide additional fanatic. So, maybe I should mention something a little bit more, which is our design of this Bitcoin staking is this concept called fanatic gadget, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The fanatic gadget, of course, comes from the Ethereum ecosystem, which is to add a gadget, a security gadget, on top of an existing blockchain with existing consensus. In fact, Casper was proposed as a fanatic gadget on top of, if I understand correctly, on top of proof of work, Ethereum. That was the first reincarnation of Casper. So you could imagine we could also apply this fanatic gadget in the longer term future, just as a brainstorming, back to the Bitcoin chain itself to provide additional security from the Bitcoin asset. So that could be one possibility, which is probably a bit better than a very discontinuous, very disruptive event of stopping the whole chain. So you can transition gradually with a mixture of proof of stake and proof of work. That's a possibility.
I like this idea, and actually that was the plan for Ethereum. Ethereum was on proof of work, and the idea was to keep the proof of work chain and have these finalized checkpoints with proof of stake on a regular basis. Unfortunately, finality gadgets only help with safety. They don't help with liveness. So you can still have a 51% attack where you effectively stall the chain. One attack that I find especially amusing would be only allow transactions that pay a 30% fee. So right now, the fees are paid per VByte, but what if they are a percentage of the Bitcoin amount that you're transferring? And after all, we have companies like Apple, right, that are charging a percentage, like a 30% fee. And so an attacker who has control over the Bitcoin chain could start only allowing transactions that pay this 30% fee. What would probably happen is that people would lose faith in the chain, the token would go to zero, and then the attacker now has a huge opportunity going back to the perp markets to short in size.
But actually, just to add to that point, liveness, right, is actually also a limitation of proof of work. Proof of stake chain. So proof of stake chain, a main security is slashing, right? Is slashing. So safety is a objective slashing. So safety is the strongest. Liveness is a very subjective slashing. In fact, I'm not so sure if I would propose to do slashing on liveness. So I think liveness is, in general, a difficult problem for proof of work and proof of stake chain.
Yes, but it's 10 times, if not 100 times harder in proof of work. And the reason is that, as you said, in proof of stake, we have this superpower of subjective slashing. We can identify who is censoring, and we can slash them subjectively. We don't have this luxury in proof of work. If the chain has been taken over, it cannot be gracefully recovered and rebooted. You can't identify the proof of work rigs of the attacker and just burn them. Like, they'll still exist physically, and they can be reused again and again to perform a 51% attack.
Subjective slashing on a proof of stake chain can be very dangerous, though, right? Can be quite dangerous.
Yeah, it's an atomic bomb.
I don't know if I would support that, but yeah, and also I think if you look at the economics of safety attack versus liveness attack, the calculation you did earlier, I think, was based on safety attack, right? It was the cost.
Liveness.
No. When you begin this discussion with 10 billion, 30 billion, those are safety attacks.
No, liveness attacks.
Liveness attacks, really?
Yes.
So how do you quantify 10? So liveness is not a double spending.
No double spending.
So how do you quantify the cost of a liveness attack? That's interesting.
So in order to take over the chain, you need a 51% attack. Bitcoin has about 600 million terahashes per second. So what you need to do is you need to acquire hardware to match the 600 million terahashes per second. Then you need to ask yourself, okay, how much does it cost to acquire 1 terahash per second? And the answer is about $17.5. And this is a very conservative estimate. And that includes both the data center cost that will give you power and cooling and the rigs as well. And if you do the math, 600 million times $17.5, that's about $10.5 billion. And that, again, is like an overestimate because there's all sorts of other tricks and cleverness that the attacker could make. Now, once you have expended these $10 billion to take control over the chain, you can perform a liveness attack. So one very simple example is that every single block from now onwards is an empty block. The chain just stalls. And so now you're in a position where people lose confidence in the chain, and Bitcoin, the token, presumably would tend towards the downward direction.
Okay, so you analyze the cost of attack, but I'm just wondering, what's the economic incentive for this cost of attack?
Yeah, so
there must be some value of attack, right? Usually
yes.
You analyze both cost and value. So
yeah, so the value goes back to the perp markets. So with a perp, you can short Bitcoin. So if you short, let's say, $20 billion of Bitcoin, and the price of Bitcoin goes to 0, you've made $20 billion. And $20 billion is greater than $10 billion. And so basically, this is why the ratio between the perp market and the cost of attack is critical. Because basically today, as of today, it would be profitable for Elon Musk to go invest $10 billion on a hobby project, short Bitcoin in size, and end up making a profit. Now imagine if the perp market to cost of attack ratio is 10x, 100x, then now it becomes a no-brainer from an entrepreneurial perspective to go attack Bitcoin.
But it hasn't happened yet, though.
It hasn't happened yet, yes. And there's multiple reasons, in my opinion. Like, one is that you need to be very sophisticated. You need to be willing to take some amount of, legal risk, because it's unclear, whether or not this is even legal. And also, it takes time to acquire this hardware, right? Like, you'd need to, manufacture and acquire en masse. The barrier to entry is very high. $10 billion is no pocket change. But in the grand scheme of things, for a country like China or Russia or the US, $10 billion is pocket change. And so I think if Bitcoin were to become world money, then it would probably be attacked by a nation state like China, and so in that sense, it cannot become world money. So yeah, that's my bearish take on Bitcoin, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, happy to also discuss other topics that you have in mind.
Yeah, because you're an expert on restaking. So I thought we would like to discuss restaking as well.
Let's do it.
So there was some discussion a few months earlier on whether restaking would harm the security of the base security of Ethereum. I'm sure you thought a lot about that, so it's been a few months already since then, so you must have. So I thought that would be an interesting topic for this restaking roll-up day.
Right, so I have this mental model where there's two types of risks that restaking can pose to the L1. One is this notion of chronic risk, where over time there's a small erosion of the security, for example, an erosion of the decentralization of the validator set. One of the potential outcomes is that there are restaking services that are, for example, only friendly to large operators. You could imagine a restaking service where in order to play the game, to be a participant, you need, let's say, 100,000 ETH. Now, 100,000 ETH is actually not that far-fetched, and the reason is that we have 30 million ETH staked, and if you have a consensus mechanism that is limited to 300 validators, 300 seats, then you might have each participant have 100,000 ETH. And so these AVSs would basically give yield to large operators to the expense of the solo validators, and there would be this slow erosion over time. And then that could potentially lead to the demise of Ethereum. The other potential risk is what I call acute risk, where there's some sort of catastrophic failure that happens in a very small amount of time, and it's so catastrophic that the social layer has to intervene, something like the DAO fork. And this is where Vitalik talks about this notion of overloading the social layer, right? We don't want to be in a position where the Ethereum community has to make decisions as to whether or not to bail out certain aspects of the Ethereum ecosystem, and it's possible that restaking will create these large honeypots of systemic failures that could trickle down to the social layer.
Yeah, I thought, actually my thinking was a bit more simple, right? Is that basically restaking is essentially adding more slashing risk.
Right.
So I guess I asked a very simple question, which is, hey, if you can restake, does that mean that your original stake was over? You have too much security, right? So you know what I mean? Because if you can emit more slashing conditions, that means you are increasing the risk on that asset. It suggests that maybe originally you have too much security to start with. That's why you could restake. If you didn't have the right level of security, then you should not be able to restake. I don't know what you think of that.
I have a similar conclusion, but I came to this conclusion in a different way. Okay. So I agree with you that we have too much economic security. We have more, let's say, than 25% of all ETH staked. And part of the reason why we have this unnecessarily large amount of economic security is because we're structurally overpaying for security. The way that the issuance curve works is that it's this curve that goes down the more ETH is staked, but at the equilibrium, at the asymptote, we're still paying 2%. Now, more likely than not, the cost of staking in terms of the hardware cost, the DevOps cost, like the slashing risks, is measured in basis points. It's much, much lower than the 2%. And so with the current issuance policy that we have, we should expect more and more ETH to be staking. And this is where the restaking meme comes in, whereby it is relevant because in order to be a yield maximizer, you first need to be staking, and then you need to be thinking of all the other things you could do with restaking. But really, restaking is a bit of a misnomer in the sense that it's programmable slashing, but you don't need to first be a staker in order to be a restaker. You can just be a normal staker. Just like in your case, right? Bitcoin doesn't have the staking.
That's right. It's
and so you
Bitcoin
just
staking.
call it staking.
Not restaking, that's correct.
So the term that I came up with, but I'm happy to hear other suggestions, is alt staking. So just like we have altcoins, we have alt staking. And I think eventually, if we were to have a better issuance policy, we could have a clean separation between staking and alt staking. And the reason is that there's this proposal to do so-called stake capping, whereby once the amount of ETH staked has reached the cap, the issuance starts going to zero very, very quickly. It could even go to negative infinity very, very quickly. And what that would create is market discovery of the true cost of staking. So if the cost of staking is, let's say, 20 basis points, 0.2%, then we should expect an efficient market to bring the yield down to 0.2% to exactly match the cost, and for staking to be net neutral. And so now, as a yield optimizer, I have no benefit to first being a staker because I'm net neutral on staking. The real yield is going to come elsewhere from the restaking operations.
Very interesting. Cool.
How much time do we have?
Anytime you want.
Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, AVS apps that are built on Babylon, how would they be unique because of the Bitcoin collateral or being in the Bitcoin ecosystem as compared to EigenLayer or a smart contract?
So for us, Bitcoin is the supply, right? We're just having a different supply.
So no difference.
There's no particular difference. If you build on the Bitcoin ecosystem, if that ecosystem identifies some interesting applications, that would be the case, but it's not really tied to the staking itself.
What currency is the yield? What are you paying for your stakers?
The yield is coming from the economic activity of the chain. So it's supporting, it's securing a chain, right? So, or secure.
You're securing layer 2, you're paying it to Bitcoin stakers.
It depends on the asset that the layer 2 has. So for example, if the layer 2 supports secure stable coin, then it could be a stable coin.
Yeah, great talk. Thank you so much. Could we say that it is a bit challenging for some AVSs building on Babylon to design slashing conditions that cannot? This mic is really, really strong. Closer, like this? But this is stronger. Okay.
Closer is stronger.
Yeah.
Good.
Perfect. So yeah, I was saying, talking about the AVSs building on Babylon. So when you look at other protocols building slashing conditions, they have a lot of choice in terms of granularity. So you can decide that I'm going to slash you for like 0.1% of the staked asset if you have some downtime. I'm going to slash you for 10% if you double sign. And in Babylon, because you split the UTXO in 3, that means that the minimum slashing basically like punishment is going to be 33% of the staked asset. Do you think that this could be like a problem for some protocol builders to design like the proper slashing conditions to like properly incentivize like good action from the validators?
Yeah, so let me clarify. There's no fixed parameter, 33%. I'm not sure where that came from. But the percentage can be specified according to the staking contract. So it could be 5%, it could be 1%. This could be chosen by the AVS or the chain itself.
But there is that part where like the UTXO is split in 3, right?
The UTXO is split into 3.
Yeah, like when you stake your Bitcoin, it is divided into 3, no?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not divided into 3.
Okay.
I hope not. It's that there are three spending maybe there's some confusion. There are three spending conditions on the Bitcoin. One is lock. You lock the Bitcoin for a certain amount of time. Two is a slashing spending condition. And the third is an unbonding, on-demand unbonding condition. So there are three conditions, not split the Bitcoin into three parts.
But it's true that the way that you slash on Bitcoin is that you leak the private key of that UTXO.
Yes.
So that means that if you leak that private key, it means that all of the Bitcoin on that.
No. So that in the contract, that private key can spend a certain percentage of the Bitcoin, and the rest of the Bitcoin will go back to the Bitcoin holder. So you can spend 95%. You can spend 5%. And in a Bitcoin transaction, in a UTXO transaction, in the output, you can specify how much of that is sent into a particular address, in this case of slashing, into a burn address, and how much is sent into another address.
Okay.
You can use that to specify the fraction of Bitcoin slashed.
Okay, thank you so much.
So in EigenLayer, they've expanded from purely objective faults to intersubjective faults using the Eigen token, such as EigenDA availability issues. How does this work in Babylon? And how do you cover things that are not just purely objective?
Yeah, we are focused on objective slashing. We are objective people.
Is that a technical limitation? Or is that a...
No, intersubjectivity, you can use a token to slash, right? By by forking.
Right.
Hi. So I have a question actually to Justin, going back to the Bitcoin discussion about Bitcoin security. So because I've had this conversation and discussion about how secure is Bitcoin throughout the years. And I think as time passes, simplifying the security of Bitcoin to spending money to buy hardware is actually basic simplification. I think there is another layer of security, which is the let's call it the game theoretical security or the economic security, which comes from the network effect that it creates and the fact that more and more people, including people in government, have Bitcoin. So what do you think about this aspect of security?
Yeah, that's a great question, whereby you might see if there is an attack, it can be identified where the attack comes from, and the nation state might come in defense of Bitcoin. There is one very interesting case study, though, which is China. China has banned exchanges. China has banned holding and buying and mining and all the things. And so basically, China is structurally short Bitcoin relative to the rest of the world. And so if Bitcoin were to go to the moon, well, Bitcoin's short. So they're going to make huge losses. And the losses are going to be way more than a few $1 billion. And so the way that they close their short position gracefully is just by attacking Bitcoin. So it can go both ways.
This one is for Justin as well. So on your point of the erosion of the decentralization of node operators, with intersubjective staking coming along, like light nodes, light node monitoring will become more and more important. So presumably more investment will go into them, and therefore therefore there will be perhaps less centralization on a few node operators. So are you more bullish given this fact that more investment will go to light nodes?
Yes, I mean, I guess the intersubjective slashing helps in a couple ways. One, as you said, is kind of accelerationist in the context of EigenDA, because it means that we're going to have more research and development on data validity sampling specifically. And really the end game for any node is to, one, do data validity sampling, and two, verify snark proofs. And that's enough for you to have like full confidence on the current state of the chain. And the meme is that I can be synced up to Ethereum and any other chain on my smartwatch, because verifying a SNARK takes a millisecond of compute time, and doing the data availability sampling is very, very cheap from a bandwidth standpoint. The other way in which the intersubjective slashing helps is that if and when there is some sort of catastrophic failure that I talked about in the acute risks, it doesn't affect ETH and the stakers. It affects this other token. And not only that, but intersubjective slashing in some sense is resilient to bugs. And the reason is that as a society, like, we can all agree on what is a bug, right? Like the DAO, like, we can all see that it's a bug, but unfortunately the smart contract doesn't know it's a bug. And so intersubjective slashing is a fantastic way to hedge against bugs, especially in the early days. And so my recommendation for AVSs that are intending to consume very large amounts of economic security, especially when they haven't been battle tested, is to use an intersubjective token to hedge against the bugs.
But intersubjectivity can be a bit tricky sometimes.
Yes.
Consider the US election 2020. You think that there's a clear answer to that, but many people do not. So that's the tricky thing in my mind about intersubjectivity slashing.
So there's a difference between subjectivity and intersubjectivity. Subjectivity would be something, as you said, like the election, Biden or Trump. Everyone has a different opinion.
I thought the election was pretty subjective, pretty objective already.
I mean the US elections.
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, sure. Like, we're all voting Trump, I guess. Is that what he's saying? Well, I'm not voting because I'm a UK citizen. But yeah, like there are things that are fundamentally subjective, and that is not the remit of intersubjective tokens. Intersubjectivity is a very small subset of the wider space of subjectivity where everyone can agree on the reality. So there is a reality, and everyone can check it. It's just that you can't check it objectively. So one great example is data value sampling. But another great example would be Oracle. So we all know, roughly what the price of ETH is, right? It's like roughly $3,000, let's say. This is not like a strongly subjective thing. It is a very small subset of subjectivity where we can all kind of agree roughly on the truth of the matter.
But sometimes information. So the subjectivity, intersubjectivity that you refer to, assumes sort of a very educated community. That is, everyone knows what reality is. But in fact, that's not a very, to me, a assumption that one can easily make. So I was using Trump as just an example. I mean, you can think of the election result everyone should agree on, right? It's the election result. But we had a problem there. Going back to more technical matters like data availability sampling, which is basically a light client needs to observe the liveness state in some sense, or the availability of a whole system. Data availability sampling is actually not so easy to achieve. The assumptions that is made to achieve data availability sampling is actually quite tricky, and that's kind of a research topic, I think.
So one way to distinguish the subjectivity and intersubjectivity is that intersubjectivity can be encoded as code, but it has to be as an observing client. It cannot be code on a smart contract. So intersubjectivity is something that can be totally automated without humans coming in. So in the context of database sampling, you're running this node that like every second or so it's doing an automated check. And same thing with price oracles. I can have a node which every second polls Binance and Kraken and Coinbase and takes the median or whatever it is, and it has some sort of automated notion of truth, but it is objective because it's from the point of view of this observer client that has been automated.
Yeah, thanks for the amazing Fireside between Justin and David. And if we have more questions, just feel free later reach out to them. Yeah, let's have another round of applause. It's a really amazing Fireside Chat. Yeah.